everyone, and welcome. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here for another explainer. We've got a truly fascinating journey ahead of us today. We're going to be unpacking some incredibly detailed, yet profoundly meaningful ancient texts. And, believe it or not, these ancient words have massive implications for how we think about structure, reverence, and even our daily routines right now in the modern world.
Hello everyone, this is TN Inside. Let's begin by reading today's scripture passage from the book of Ezekiel, chapters 44 to 46. We are diving deep into the words given to Ezekiel. Now remember, this was a man living in the bleak, seemingly hopeless land of Babylon. And together, we're going to explore the vivid, highly structured vision he received for the future.
To make this complex vision a bit easier to digest, we're going to break it down into 5 key areas. 1. The glory returns. 2. Rules for the priests. 3. Dividing the promised land. 4. Feasts, sacrifices, and rhythms. And 5. Worship in spirit today. Let's get right into it.
Starting off with Section 1, the glory returns.
Okay, picture this. Imagine being Ezekiel, standing before a newly envisioned sanctuary, just waiting for something monumental to happen. And then suddenly the glory of the Lord actually fills the temple. Ezekiel literally falls face down as the glory enters in this supernatural form, kind of like a radiant cloud or a blazing fire, just like it had back in the days of Moses and Solomon. But here's where it gets highly specific. God commands that the east gate, the exact path his glory used to enter, must be permanently sealed. No exceptions. Why? Well, because the ground the divine walked upon must never be defiled by common human footsteps ever again. It's a powerful physical guarantee that God's presence has returned, and it's definitely not leaving.
That brings us to Section 2, Rules for the Priests.
So, with the divine presence securely back in the sanctuary, some really strict rules are put into place for the people managing this holy space. And you'll notice a stark contrast right away. We see a clear division of labor based entirely on past faithfulness. The Levites, who unfortunately led the people into idolatry during their spiritual wandering, they face some pretty severe consequences. They're actually stripped of their inner temple duties and relegated to just guarding the gates and maintaining the grounds. On the flip side, you have the priests from the faithful line of Zadok. These guys stood firm when everyone else strayed, and they are highly rewarded for it. They're granted the exclusive sacred honor of approaching the Lord to offer the sacrifices of fat and blood. It's a pretty profound lesson in accountability, right?
And the regulations for these inner court priests get even more fascinating. Take a look at this rule regarding their literal uniform. They are strictly commanded to wear only linen garments. We're talking linen turbans, linen undergarments, absolutely no wool. Now, the reasoning here is brilliant and makes total sense for the ancient mindset. Wool causes you to sweat, and sweat, like any bodily excretion, was considered fundamentally unclean. There was simply no room for the messy, sweaty reality of human exertion in the pristine, holy presence of God.
And this intense focus on purity, it bled into every single corner of their personal lives. Their hair had to be perfectly trimmed, not shaved bald, mind you, but definitely not left to grow wild either. It was all about absolute moderation. Wine was completely forbidden in the inner court to ensure totally clear judgment. Marriage was strictly restricted to virgins or widows of other priests. Even mourning the dead, which is, a deeply human emotional response, was restricted only to immediate family members to avoid ritual defilement. Every single rule on this list was meticulously designed for one purpose: to force the priests to be living, breathing examples of the absolute boundary between the sacred and the everyday. They literally had to teach the common people the difference between the holy and the common.
Let's move on to Section 3, Dividing the Promised Land. God wasn't just organizing the people, he was reorganizing the physical earth itself. Look at this massive measurement, 25,000 by 20,000 cubits. When the Israelites were told to divide the promised land, they weren't just plotting out standard farms and towns. No, they were commanded to take this enormous specific portion of land, which is roughly 12 kilometers by 5 kilometers for the sanctuary alone, by the way, and set it apart as a holy gift. It was a literal tithe of the earth given back to the Lord.
If you look at it, the geography here is essentially a giant spiritual bullseye. Right there at the dead center is the sanctuary, just broadcasting divine authority outward. Wrapped right around that is the city and the inheritance of the everyday people. And then, guarding the outer flanks to the east and the west, is the land assigned to the king. The physical map of the nation perfectly reflected their spiritual reality. God is at the center, the people surround him in worship, and the political rulers are positioned on the outside to protect and serve, not to dominate.
Moving right along to Section 4, Feasts, Sacrifices, and Rhythms.
Now that the physical space is perfectly ordered, the explainer transitions into laws governing the flow of time itself. And these laws leave absolutely nothing to chance, right down to the exact math. The people were required to provide exactly 1 lamb for every 200 sheep they owned. This wasn't just a polite suggestion, it was a strict economic baseline. This collective offering was handed over to the king, whose primary responsibility was to provide the sacrifices for the national festivals, the new moons, and the Sabbaths.
And the schedule for these sacrifices? Incredibly rigorous. Just take a look at the timeline for the very first month of the year alone. On day 1, an unblemished bull is offered, and its blood is painted right onto the temple doorposts. Fast forward to day 7, and special atonement is made for everyone who might have sinned out of ignorance. And this all builds up to day 14, the start of the Passover, which is then followed by 7 straight days of unleavened bread and daily burnt offerings. The calendar was entirely designed to keep the people in a constant, uninterrupted rhythm of remembering God's grace and atoning for their missteps.
It's fascinating because even the king, literally the most powerful man in the nation, had a highly choreographed routine he had to follow. On the Sabbath, he would enter through the outer east gate. But notice step 2 here. He stops. He stands by the doorpost. He absolutely does not cross into the inner court. Instead, he watches the priests prepare his offerings, bows in worship at the threshold, and then exits. He had to lead the nation in worship without ever overstepping his bounds into the holy domain of the priests.
Oh, and I absolutely love this detail. It's basically brilliant ancient crowd control. During the massive appointed festivals, if a worshiper entered the temple complex through the north gate, they were legally required to keep moving forward and exit through the south gate. Enter south, exit north. No turning around, no pushing against the flow of traffic. God is a God of order, and these traffic patterns ensured that these massive, joyous gatherings didn't devolve into chaotic, dangerous mobs.
We also see some really smart structural guardrails placed on the economy and the monarchy. If the king gave land from his own inheritance to his son, well, that was permanent. But if he gifted land to a servant, it was strictly temporary. At the year of Jubilee, that land automatically reverted back to the royal estate. This brilliantly ensured that the king could distribute wealth without permanently draining the royal resources. But more importantly, it strictly forbade the king from ever seizing the people's property to enrich his own staff.
Even the architecture of the kitchens reinforced these strict boundaries. Ezekiel was shown dedicated, separate boiling pots in a specific area, west of the holy rooms. This priest's kitchen existed for one reason, so that the holy sacrificial meat would never accidentally brush up against the common people out in the outer courts. Every single wall, every pot, every uniform was shouting the exact same message. The holy must be kept distinct.
And finally, Section 5. Worship in spirit today.
So we've looked at ancient crowd control, linen undergarments, and giant property boundaries. And at this point, we really have to ask the ultimate question. Why on earth do these ancient, incredibly specific procedures matter for us today? What can we, sitting here in the modern world, possibly learn from the architectural measurements of a temple built millennia ago?
Well, the answer actually lies in the very text of Ezekiel itself. Amidst all these physical rules, God points out that the Israelites failed because they were uncircumcised in heart. The absolutely crucial point here is this: circumcision of the heart means the internal, intentional removal of sinful elements from your life. God wasn't just looking for people to blindly follow a floor plan or wear the right fabric. Actually, scratch that. He was using those physical boundaries to teach them how to guard their inner, spiritual lives. The external rituals were always meant to point to an internal purity.
Which brings us to this incredibly powerful quote from our source material. While we no longer perform sacrifices today, we must continue the spirit of worshiping in spirit and in truth. The literal blood of bulls and the strict linen garments, well, those are a thing in the past. But the absolute reverence, the intentional separation of what is good and holy from what is toxic and common, that mandate hasn't changed one bit.
So, I want to leave you with this provocative thought as we wrap up today's explainer. How are you presenting your very best offerings in your daily life? You might not be bringing a flawless lamb to a temple gate, but how are you structuring your time, your focus, and your energy to ensure that the holy parts of your life aren't being completely overrun by the common chaos of the everyday world? It's a fascinating challenge to internalize, isn't it? Thank you so much for joining me as we explored this profound text. Keep seeking clarity, and I'll see you in the next explainer.